Hey, how's it going, guys? It is Fox98 here. Welcome back to yet another F1 debate for you guys today here on the channel. Now, of course, as you would have seen and as you would have known from my subscription box, if you are subscribed to the channel, obviously, I didn't do a video for the Monaco Grand Prix. Short and short, I've just been super busy. I've been away on holiday. I've been doing, my full-time job, which isn't YouTube, and I've just been super busy. And it's been great weather, so I've been outside touching grass. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the Monaco Grand Prix and also the Spanish Grand Prix. Fortunately, I don't really have that much to say about the Monaco Grand Prix, which means we can kind of gloss over it in a circumstance as my phone continues to buzz in the background. But if you enjoy the video, though, drop a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well. And as per with every single F1 debate video that I ever do, please put your thoughts in the comment section down below. That's what they're there for, and they're your opinions only. No matter whether you completely agree with what I'm saying, disagree with what I'm saying, or just have a different outlook on something that may have or have not happened. So, let's talk about the Monaco Grand Prix first things first. Amazing qualifying. Probably one of the best dry qualifying sessions you're ever going to watch. If you want to see 20 drivers putting their cars to the absolute limit, you will not get anything better than what you saw at Monte Carlo. Every single driver out there put it on the line. And Q3 was by far the best Q3 you'll ever see, with different drivers going fastest. You had Ocon going quickest. Then you had Leclerc going fastest and Alonso doing it. And then Max Verstappen, in my opinion, putting in probably the best qualifying lap of his career. Or if you would discount the first two sectors, then his greatest third sector you'll ever see in his career. But it was an amazing qualifying session. It was absolutely high intensity, high thrilling, had me on the edge of my seat, unlike the Grand Prix itself, which unfortunately was clouded over by rain. Hope you can see what I kind of did there, because I got onto it. Let's just face the facts here. If it wasn't raining, it would have been the worst race of the season by an absolute country mile. Everyone says that we need to go to shorter cars that are lighter and it helps you to pass around Monaco, etc, etc. It's been impossible to pass around Monaco for decades upon decades, just because Formula E had a race where it just piled overtakes after overtakes. Formula E is a completely different category to Formula 1, to the point where Formula E literally just races around a street circuit. It doesn't race around normal circuits. Formula E is different. It has been, and it always will be different to Formula 1. So the reason that Formula E was entertaining is because that's just the generation of car. That is the car that it is. It's a street racing car. That's the point. For Formula 1, I mean, you just need to look back at the top 5 battles that they introduced during that weekend. It was literally showcasing Senna versus Mansell when Senna was on. I don't even know if he pitted. I can't remember if he pitted at all in that race. I don't think he did. Mansell then went to fresh tyres because he got a puncture, and Nigel could not pass Ayrton Senna. Don't get me wrong, it was defensive masterclass from Senna, putting his car in the right places, but there was no way that Mansell was going to pass. And we're talking 1992 here. And in 1992, for those of you that weren't around in 1992, I wasn't, but I've watched pretty much every single race that Ayrton Senna ever participated in, because he's my all-time favourite driver. In 1992, the McLaren Honda was nowhere near as fast as the Williams FW14B. All you need to do is look at the Red Bull from now and compare that to basically say that the Red Bull from now was what the Williams was, because the Benetton and the McLaren were effectively Mercedes and Ferrari, or Mercedes and Aston Martin from that era. And then the Ferrari was even further back in 93. Ferrari was awful in 93, actually. So, yeah. Apart from that, obviously the rain provided entertainment. Let's not get around the fact here that the drivers slipping off the track, going into the barriers and so what. It caused a lot of drama that we so desperately needed. But it clouded yet again that for 60 odd laps or 50 laps, whenever the rain fell, I think it was about lap 55. 55 laps of just pure snooze fest. And it's just not fun. I don't like Monaco. It gave me an amazing quali, but it gave me a shocking Grand Prix. And obviously Alonso threw it away with that one. They should have pitted for Inters, and they would have been like 10 seconds clear out front. So, shame there for Aston Martin. But that is Monaco. And it took me 4.5 minutes to basically talk about that, plus the intro piece. Shows how much I really care about the race. It just wasn't worth anything. Now that we covered that, we go to Spain, and we had lots of teams bringing upgrades for this weekend. Of course, we were expecting to see them at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, but we didn't get them, obviously, because of the cancelled Grand Prix. This is my first F1 debate video as well since the Miami Grand Prix, I think it was now, so I haven't actually mentioned anything about the Emilia-Romagna region, but obviously my thoughts go out to everybody who's been affected in that region, and it's great to see Formula One putting in so much support towards the Emilia-Romagna region with the €1 million what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for now? Charity, donation. I get there in the end. Ferrari also put in a donation. I saw Yuki Tsunoda obviously helping clean the streets. The Emilia-Romagna trophies were auctioned off to raise money. Yeah, great cause. Well done, F1. You smashed out the park yet again when the going gets tough in the world, which is what Formula One is at least very, very good at doing. But heading into Barcelona, we saw lots of teams bringing in upgrades and also teams trialing out their upgrade packages, such as the team that's on my shirt. That's the Petronas badge. That's the Mercedes badge. Of course, Mercedes bringing their upgrades to Monaco, but you're never really going to get anything out of Monaco. You were going to get it in Barcelona. And it was a weird one. We saw qualifying was very, very close and very, very mixed in terms of the pack. And then the race had a very, very clear-cut section of who was the quickest and who was the slowest. And it was quite interesting to see because, again, we saw Verstappen get pole. Why are we not surprised? But qualifying, we saw Leclerc going out in Q1 on legitimate pace. Something was wrong with the rear end of that car, and he made setup changes and started from the pit lane. That still didn't do anything, but I'm going to cover Ferrari in a bit more detail. We saw Russell make contact with Lewis Hamilton on the start-finish straight. We saw Perez go out in Q2 on legitimate pace again, and he threw it away. And we saw, the likes of Sainz getting on the front row. We saw Gasly putting in a great quali session until he knew he was going to get penalised with his 2 clear-cut penalty incidents. But still, it was a weird qualifying session, but it was enjoyable. It was great fun. And of course, this was the first time as well that we saw the Formula One cars going around the Spanish Grand Prix circuit for the first time since 2007 at the new final corner. Can I just say thank you? It's been so long since we've actually had that chicane, in place from 2007 onwards till 2022, where we've had that stupid final sector and that stupid chicane, and I've hated it every time they've gone through there. But the final corner worked, and the crucial thing is in the race we saw plenty of overtaking, but it was perfectly well balanced. Through turn 12, they could follow through turn 12, and all of a sudden then they've got the run through T13, they've got the run through T14, and if they can follow, which they could, and then the drivers ahead was flying through those final 2 corners, they had a great run on the straight. I was watching some of the overtakes that Mercedes were doing, because Mercedes had a brilliant race and made some great overtakes. From the exit of turn 12 to the start-finish straight at the end, they were at least about 8.5 tenths behind the guy in front. Now, normally, if we say that gap and you're in the DRS zone, you're not really going to get anywhere. It's actually going to be quite pointless for you to even try and make an overtake. But this time around, we were seeing drivers overtaking. But crucially, we didn't see too many. Now, there was a couple, let's be honest, where the drivers just breezed past with the DRS. I'm talking Russell on Lance Stroll, and I'm talking Perez on Fernando Alonso, and Alonso on, I think, Guan Yu Zhou, but that was when he came out of the pits, in fairness. So we saw a lot of, or quite a few, where they just breezed past with DRS, but we saw a lot where they really had to actually battle quite hard for it. Hamilton had to really do work on the brakes versus Stroll, because Stroll went in quite deep on the brakes to try and off-put Hamilton, and it didn't work. Lewis's move on Sainz, Russell's move on Sainz, really had to get it done on the brakes and work for it. There was a lot of cars that really had to work for the overtakes, especially, I think it was also Tsunoda, and it was either Magnussen or Hulkenberg that had to work for it. Also, Zhou Guan Yu also was in the mix of it. There was like a 3-way fight going on, and there was one driver coming out of the pits and getting involved. I think it was Gasly, potentially, but overall, that new chicane, the new high-speed 2 final corners worked beautifully. It was a fantastic change. It was great to see the cars just flying straight through there. I do it on the F1 game all the time, so it was great to just be able to see them just breeze through there. And the cars worked. They could follow, and it was a good overtaking spot that really allowed you to go for it. And I think the DRS run from the straight down towards turn 10, it didn't necessarily... what's the word I'm trying to look for? It didn't necessarily do it. It did nothing. No one overtook there. But it was almost like the initial setup phase, you know, of, oh, we're 9/10 back. Let's get some DRS. Now we're about 5/10 back, something around about that margin. All of a sudden, we've dropped about 2 or 3 tenths because we're going into a bit of a section where we're just not as quick. Back end sliding, turbulent areas there. But all of a sudden, that little bit of DRS gave us that 1 or 2 tenths that we just needed to then bolt and have a go on the start-finish straight. And we saw loads of overtaking in the Grand Prix, which was great to see. The issue was we saw none of that at the front of the field, and that's what killed the race, which is a shame, but we'll move on to that. So at the start of the race then, obviously we had a mixed-up grid, quite interesting, and we saw the 2 Red Bulls on the mediums and the rest on the softs. I'm not going to lie, I was hoping Verstappen would bog down at the start and at least have to fight for the lead. It didn't happen though. Sainz got a great slipstream, but he didn't really go... Well, he went around the outside, but Max just got his elbows out, and Sainz just got scared and pulled back out of it. A lot of people were complaining that Max's move was very aggressive, but at the end of the day, if Sainz wasn't going to back out of it and Max could see that he's not backing out of it, then I think maybe Max would have done something completely different. You know, we saw, for example, in Australia with Max versus Russell, and also Max versus Hamilton. Max literally was, well, he was complaining because obviously he got done in by the 2 Mercs, but he was saying how he was going to change his driving style and be more aggressive. I mean, at the end of the day, let's be real though, Max is the most aggressive driver out there, and if somebody puts a bit of aggression on him like Russell did in Australia, and also in Baku actually, then he puts up a bit of a paddy about it. So realistically, it's up to the teams and the drivers to, well, throw the aggression back at him, as we'd say. And until then, obviously, nothing was going to happen. The incident between Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris, a very unfortunate incident. Of course, Sainz was off-put through T1 because he went around the outside trying to take Max. He then obviously tried to cover off turn 2, and that sent him a bit wide because of how his entry was. Hamilton saw that, and what Lewis clearly wanted to do was to switch back and have the outside line for turn 3, pinch Sainz on the apex of 3, and then go right around the outside. It didn't work. Well, we don't know if it worked or not. Lando Norris also got caught by slowing down and then made contact with Hamilton. Lewis was very lucky to not lose his... to get a puncture, by the way. Super lucky. And, of course, he had contact with Magnussen on the first lap in 2022. And, well, got him a puncture that time around. So maybe it's a bit of redemption, but he lost the position to Lance Stroll. He got that position off of Stroll. He got the position off of Sainz in the second stint, and was able to just easily control second place. And I'm going to talk about Mercedes very briefly. Of course... Mercedes, are they back? That was the term that was being used around here. And look, I'm a Mercedes fan. Are they back? No. No way are they back. At the end of the day, let's be real. Mercedes were half a second off in qualifying. They were 24 seconds behind Verstappen in the Grand Prix. Does that really determine them as back? No, of course it doesn't. The only time that question ever needs to be asked if Mercedes are back is when they're winning, when they're getting pole position and when they're winning on merit. You know, like Brazil. We were able to ask the question, are Mercedes truly back in Brazil? The answer was no. It was an outlier of a circuit. Whatever the Mercedes did during that weekend, their car just worked. And that's as simple as that. In terms of are they back? No. I mean, Mercedes were the outright second fastest car on the grid by quite some distance, in fairness, for only the second time this season. Let's not forget that. In Bahrain, it was quite clear that they were the third fastest car. You know, the fourth fastest car. Ferrari and Aston Martin were quicker. You know, in Saudi Arabia, they were the third fastest car. They were ahead of Ferrari. In Australia, they were the second fastest car there with Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, Russell DNF, so we didn't get to see much from him. In Miami, I think we did after Australia. I can't even remember the full calendar at this rate. But, you know, the gist is that they've been the second fastest car throughout the course of this, the third fastest car, pretty much, throughout the course of the season. In terms of outright second fastest, it was obviously their second time being that. Now, I do understand why people are saying the term, are Mercedes back? Lewis Hamilton obviously had a chance to get onto the front row in qualifying. He threw it away. There was no doubt about it. The camera cut off of it, but going through the new reprofiled turn 10, the back end stepped down Hamilton. He probably would have lost about 2 tenths maybe through that section. And that 1/10.5, 2 tenths was more than enough for him to get onto the front row. Just shows how close the grid is in qualifying. But then, you get to see the cars in race trim, and you can see there's a big difference between them. So yeah, for Hamilton's sake, that's where he lost the time. But obviously in the race, it was extremely convincing that Mercedes was the second fastest car by quite some distance from Ferrari and Aston Martin. But it's one Grand Prix, and yes, they always say if you're good around Barcelona, you're going to be good everywhere else. Now, of course, for Mercedes' sake, they've obviously ran the concept in Monaco, but you don't get any information from Monaco. They've done great here in Spain, but Canada's a completely different circuit. There's a lot of chicanes, there's a lot of straights. It's not quite as similar to Spain, so we just have to wait and see. And of course, who knows if other teams are going to be bringing in some upgrades, and we just have to wait and see. Of course, there are teams that brought upgrades, they just need to start looking at them. Looking at Aston Martin, strange weekend for them. Very strange. They were way off the pace. Their race car didn't work here, which is a bit of a shame, because obviously Alonso has been pretty much no lower than 4th throughout the whole of this season. And then he comes to his home Grand Prix in a car that's working well, and it didn't work well at all. It's a shame. Of course, he was compromised in qualifying with the damaged floor. He lost around about, I think it was about like half a second worth of performance, which would have put him about 8/10 off a pole. So he still would have been quite far down there, but not as far back as he was, which was a shame. Lance Stroll had a decent weekend. Beat Alonso in quali and beat him in the race, so you can't argue with that really. Obviously Alonso had his floor fixed for the Grand Prix, but as he said, he's already damaged one floor. He's got to be a bit more cautious, but I kind of don't agree with that. It's like, well, it's the race. If you damage your floor on lap 1, it doesn't matter because you can't change your floor in a race, even though you've damaged one floor. I guess it's a bit to do with the budget cap, but at the same time, it's a little bit iffy in there. But yeah, their car didn't really work. I don't know why, but it just didn't, which is a bit of a shame for Alonso. I would have liked to have seen him on the podium for his home Grand Prix, but it just wasn't meant to be. But Alonso said that he will crush his rivals because apparently they're bringing some upgrades to Canada, which is an interesting place to do it. I thought if they're going to do it, they'd do it at Spain, but clearly not. They didn't. Red Bull, I haven't talked about them yet. Going to talk about them quickly. Verstappen, absolutely dominant. Fastest in every single session, led every single lap, got the fastest lap, literally did the ultimate grand slam of a weekend in Spain. Red Bull have won both championships. Verstappen's going to be a 3-time world champion. End of story. Perez is not good enough. I was very hopeful that Perez would turn a corner when it was 2 wins apiece. But all of a sudden, Perez has had a dip in form. And unfortunately, Verstappen is not that type of driver anymore that's just going to have that type of a dip in form. It's just not happening. When you let him get some momentum and some form going, he's really, really on it. You really need to wind up Verstappen. And all he's done is just allow Verstappen to go, yeah, I got this in the bag now. He had a poor qualifying session in Monaco, crashed out in there, and ruined his entire weekend. He had a poor qualifying here in Spain. He had a poor qualifying in Australia. It's just not good enough. And when Verstappen has had bad qualifying sessions, which was in Saudi and also in Miami, he did what he needed to do in terms of recovery for the Red Bull car. It was in Jeddah, I finished second. I wasn't able to beat Perez, but finished second. That's the best damage limitation absolute possible. And in Miami, he was so quick that he actually won. And that's what we've been saying. If you can't beat Verstappen in a specific race weekend, you've got to finish second. Verstappen did that. It's like, if you can't beat Perez, which he couldn't beat him in Jeddah, even though he had the qualifying issue, you've got to finish second. And he finished second. And then obviously in Miami, well, he had the pace anyway, so he won. Simple as that. Now, Ferrari. I don't really know what to say about Ferrari anymore. I really don't. A team that was challenging for the title for the first half of the 2022 season lost their way with it in the second half of the season through the whole team just not working well, with Leclerc's mistakes, with the car not being developed correctly. They just threw it all away. And now all of a sudden, they've come into this weekend. Sainz, by the way, had a great weekend. Don't get me wrong. He didn't have the issues that Leclerc had, but all things considered, great weekend for Sainz. But for Leclerc, I have no idea what could have gone wrong for him. I don't know how he managed to get knocked out in Q1. I don't know what he did in the race. In the race, he did nothing, so something obviously was going wrong. And then they brought upgrades heading into this weekend, and it was a big configuration change. Again, very similar to like Mercedes' type of upgrade, a big change to the side pods, that configuration. But here's the thing, and I don't want to try and blag and say that I'm an aerodynamicist, because I'm not. I'm a complete rookie. All I care about is, all I know about is the tracks and the racing. I don't know anything about aerodynamics, but I tweeted out, and if I remember to put in the tweet, I will. If not, then just go on my Twitter. Links in the description. You'll be able to find where I tweeted it. When Alberto, the main man himself, put out a picture of the new Ferrari side pods, I quote tweeted that and I said, for some reason, I just don't see it working. And obviously this is one race, I'll be honest with that, and there's a reason that I'll come to later why that is. There was just one race, obviously, but something about whenever Ferrari brings updates to their cars, they never work. You know, 2018, they kept bringing updates during their title fight, and it wasn't really working properly. They were having to revert to old spec flaws and stuff, and they've been doing this consistently. And again, I looked at this side pod configuration, and it was obviously they've got the portion of the bathtub that goes along the upper frame of the car, which then basically is to go through the center piece and onto the beam wing. And then they've got the downwash effect that goes down in towards the rear of the car that way, which obviously all teams are now adopting the downwash effect from the side pods. But the way that Ferrari split it and the way their side pod just looked, it just didn't look right. It just looked weird and just... It looked like an airflow massacre going on through there. It didn't look good. And they weren't good. They were nowhere near it here today. I mean, tyre wear is one of their biggest weaknesses, but their weaknesses are not being addressed. You know, with Mercedes-Benz, heading into this season, Mercedes pretty much managed to eliminate one of their biggest weaknesses, and that was the dragginess of their car. Okay, they had way more downforce. You know, they had pretty much a downforce car versus a draggy car. Heading into this season, Mercedes pretty much addressed quite a lot of the draggy issues. What Mercedes severely lacked with going with the zero pod concept again was outright rear stability and rear downforce and running the car a bit lower to the ground. And Mercedes have brought so many changes to allow them to be in that window that heading into this race in Spain, now of course, like I said, there's plenty more races to go to see what Mercedes' upgrade does versus what other teams' upgrades do and so forth. But heading into this race in particular, Mercedes had it perfectly. They didn't have the great top-end speed that Red Bull has. That's all to come with, you know, probably next season now, because they're going to have to change the monocoque and the chassis to fit the new concept that they're going through, which they can't do in this season because of the cost cap. But moving forwards, they've got a direction that they can work on now. And if Mercedes is at that performance line, and that's their baseline performance from these upgrades, then they're in a massively strong position. If that's Ferrari's baseline from their upgrades, they're screwed. They are genuinely screwed. So I genuinely hope, for Ferrari's sake, they actually have got a development direction. Because if they don't, they're in big, big trouble. And I genuinely can't see them just improving in the latter stages. But let's have a look at the rest of the teams then and see how I thought that they got on. McLaren didn't really do anything. Obviously, Norris had a great quali, but he crashed into the back of Lewis and his pace was just diminished. Piastri wasn't really that quick, and I think on the average mean race pace, they were like the 8th fastest car or the 7th, which is just shows that McLaren have got a long way to go. And a lot of people really thought that when McLaren brought their upgrades to Baku, that they were going to be fine. They were going to be back on top, back in the 4th fastest car, job done. It was never going to be like that. I never thought McLaren would be in that position, because what McLaren did is they brought their upgrades for the for the Baku Grand Prix. That is literally what they should have had at the start of the season. So what you're saying is the design that they've brought is where they should be the 4th fastest car? No, because everybody's developing their cars because they got them on time. So for McLaren's sake, no, they were never going to be they were never going to be 4th fastest. And I mean, if you look at where we are from the start of the season all the way to Baku, McLaren are not only that far behind, but pre-winter as well, when they were missing the deadlines. So for McLaren's sake, no, you can expect them to be down the bottom half of the table in race pace. Obviously, quali can be different for pretty much the remainder of the season, because it's so difficult to catch it back up. Of course, they'll have the wind tunnel time, but the cost cap is really going to basically just hurt them. Alpine, I mean, they said at the Spanish Grand Prix that they would easily beat Mercedes and Ferrari and be close to Aston Martin. Maybe they shouldn't be saying those type of statements again, because that clearly wasn't the case. And the rest of the grid was just evenly matched. Yeah, it was quite even. want to talk about one thing. Williams, right? When Sargent crashed in FP3 and his car came back into the garage, the floor. I'll put a picture of it up on the screen. Again, if I forget, you can sue me. But, oh my God, when James Vowles said something, I can't remember what he mentioned. He mentioned a quote. It wasn't to do with the staff that was there, but it's to do with the equipment that they've got to build cars. That is the most basic flaw you will ever see in your life. Like, genuinely the most basic. Let me show you something. Okay, so we've seen what the Williams flaw is like, right? It is literally as plain as it possibly gets. Now, nice hiccup there. What I've got is a Mercedes-Benz Formula 1 car. It is literally just a B-Urago. Basically, it's a toy car. I prefer to just buy these as collectibles rather than spending hundreds of pounds on full-on proper models because, I mean, it's literally the same thing. It's the car. That's all I want to have it as my collectibles. So anyway, look at the floor, right? I'm going to try and get the camera to focus in on the floor here, and hopefully you'll get a better indication of what I'm trying to look at here. It's not great, but look at the floor design, right, on this B-Urago toy. This has got more design to it than the Williams floor. It's a B-Urago toy, and it has more design, more elements, more specific ways that a car can flow than this. It's annoying that it's not focusing entirely on this, but you can kind of see what I mean. If I flip it that way, look at the amount of design that there is versus a Williams floor. Oh, perfect. It's focused. There you go. Look at that. Compared that to a Williams floor, this has got more design to it. It's a toy. And it's got more design than a Williams floor. Oh, it was quite funny when I saw that. But yeah, poor thing for Williams. They've got a lot of work to do. And it kind of just shows that Albon really has got a good piece of performance underneath him. And if you're wondering as well why the tone of voice has indeed decreased, it's actually quite late when I'm doing this video. So yeah, I'm just shutting up a little bit more as we slowly progress. And then the rest of the field was quite close. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was Yuki Tsunoda's penalty. You got a penalty obviously for forcing Guan Yu Zhou off the track. Many people disagree with it. I completely agree with the penalty. If the overtake scenario continued as it was, contact was being made and they were literally going to bump themselves off the circuit. Guan Yu Zhou was very clever to get out of the way when he did, and it was definitely a clear-cut penalty for Yuki Tsunoda. I know you can say that he technically bailed out early, but the steering and the speed projection that Tsunoda was going at, he was never going to be leaving the room for Guan Yu Zhou. It's a fair enough penalty for me, in my opinion. I think it is a penalty. You can disagree with that by all means, but I genuinely think it was. So, that's pretty much the Spanish Grand Prix run and done. It was a great Grand Prix. I really enjoyed it. It just didn't have the fighting at the front, which really just nullifies the whole race. But at the end of the day, the Spanish Grand Prix has been revived, in my opinion. The last two corners have made it a much more entertaining factor, and they can follow. That's the key things. Moving forwards, though, we've got the Canadian Grand Prix next weekend. What are my predictions for that race? Well, Red Bull are going to win with Max Verstappen because I just don't see Perez really competing with Verstappen anymore, in my opinion. Where do I think the rest of the field's going to be, though? I think quali's going to be quite mixed between them. I think Aston Martin will probably have the second fastest car heading into the weekend. I think Mercedes will be very, very close with them heading into the race itself. Canada's normally a two-stop race, which means it can be quite tricky on tyres, and it's normally been a tricky race for tyre compounds in the past. I think Ferrari will struggle yet again in the weekend. They really don't have a good time with tyres, and I think it's another one of those races where it's going to hurt them. I think Alpine, again, they seem to be solidifying themselves as the fifth fastest car on the grid now, and then the rest is just, well, it just flickers and flows. I don't really know where anyone is else on the rest of the grid, but that's kind of where I think everyone's going to be at. But if you enjoyed the video, though, drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here as well. And I'll see you guys for the next F1 debate video after the Canadian Grand Prix. Thank you very much for watching. I'm out. Peace.